In 1909, long before Las Vegas was neon and fortune, it was dust, desperation and unmarked graves. The Hendersons were among the first families to dare stake their future on this barren stretch of Nevada. They came for land, for opportunity, for the promise whispered by railroad men and city speculators. But they paid for it, in ways no one should. Because what nobody tells you is that this place always had a thirst. A thirst for bodies. For secrets. For suffering. 89 people vanished in the summer of 1909. Most of them linked, directly or by blood, to the Henderson family's miraculous land deal that made them overnight aristocrats in a town built on bones. Tonight, we'll uncover the chilling story buried beneath the sun-scorched soil, the story of the Henderson family, the land they bought, and the dark covenant that demanded nearly 100 souls to be satisfied. If stories of historical hauntings, family curses, and towns built on unholy ground keep you awake at night, hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell and stay with us till the end. Because once you hear what happened in Las Vegas in 1909, you'll never look at empty desert the same way again. Chapter 1, The Arrival. The stagecoach from San Bernardino rolled into the skeletal township of Las Vegas on a blistering June afternoon. The sun clung to every scrap of iron and wood, warping the air above the dirt road into ghostly mirages. Inside the stage sat Lawrence Henderson, patriarch of the family, clutching a small leather ledger that contained everything he believed would buy their future. A crude hand-drawn map of lots recently opened for purchase by the Las Vegas Land and Water Company, a string of promises from railway brokers, and, folded carefully, a contract signed in Carson City, its ink still pungent like something recently killed. Beside him, his wife Margaret dabbed sweat from her brow, her gloved hands trembling. Their eldest, Thomas, just 16, stared blankly out the window, eyes glazed, already scorched by days of relentless travel. Behind them, 8-year-old Abigail curled up on a burlap sack, half awake, mumbling under her breath. No one understood what she muttered, only that it was constant, like a broken phonograph. When the coach finally stopped, Lawrence stepped down first. His boots sank slightly into powdery dirt that smelled vaguely of copper. He reached back to help Margaret, but she recoiled at the first breath of desert air. "Do you smell it?" she whispered, her face draining of color. "Sulfur, perhaps. Or iron. These lands are rich with minerals." "That's why we're here," Lawrence replied, forcing a smile. He kept his voice calm, though his stomach twisted. Around them, the town was a scatter of false fronts, cheap lumber nailed together to look like prosperity. A saloon with swinging doors creaked with the wind. A general store leaned to one side. And beyond all that stretched the nothingness of Nevada, an endless flat expanse punctuated by parched arroyos and the occasional carcass of a coyote, ribs stark white against sun-baked ground. By evening, they were settled into a boarding house run by a severe woman named Mrs. Coulter. The rooms smelled of mildew and stale tobacco. As Lawrence signed the guest book, Mrs. Coulter leaned in, her breath sour. "You'll be buying that Henderson tract out east, I presume?" she rasped. Lawrence stiffened. "Yes. How did you?" "Everyone knows. Been whisper of it for months. Strange deal you made. Real strange." Before Lawrence could demand an explanation, she snapped the ledger closed and shuffled away. That night, the family lay awake in the cramped room. Outside, coyotes yowled, but there was something else too, a deeper, almost human wail that rose and fell on the wind. Margaret squeezed Lawrence's hand so hard he thought his bones might crack. "Tell me again this is the right thing," she begged. "It's a future. For us. For the children. Land means power. It means security. But at what cost?" At that, little Abigail rolled over in her cot, eyes wide open, though she seemed not quite awake. "They're waiting," she said softly. "They want to be fed. They've been so hungry." The room fell utterly silent. Margaret began to sob, and Lawrence found he could not muster a single comforting word. The next morning they rode out to see the land, escorted by a local broker named Silas Mott. He was tall and thin, with papery skin that seemed to crack when he smiled. "This here's a grand opportunity," Mott said, voice syrupy. "Water rights, rail access. And the ground, oh, fertile like you wouldn't believe. They passed over hills littered with bleached bones. Cattle surely. Or so Lawrence told himself. Finally they reached the Henderson plot, 50 acres of reddish soil. The air there was different. Heavy. As though it carried voices just out of earshot. Margaret refused to step from the buggy. Abigail did, but only to squat and press her small hands into the dirt. When she rose, her palms were stained rust red, and she smiled a hollow smile. They said it'll grow strong here. As long as the feeding continues. Abby, what did you say? Margaret choked. But Abigail only giggled, twirling with her stained hands held high like a preacher invoking some unholy benediction. Silas Mott merely tipped his hat. Children have imaginations, Mrs. Henderson. Pay it no mind. But Lawrence was already beginning to suspect that in Las Vegas, it was wiser to pay mind to everything. Even, especially, to the whispers of little girls. That evening the town's mood had shifted. Men watched the Hendersons with a strange mixture of pity and thinly veiled horror. Women made small crosses over their chests when they passed by, as if hoping to ward off something that clung to the family like a dark stain. When Lawrence returned from finalizing the paperwork with Silas, Mrs. Coulter was waiting on the porch of the boarding house. Her mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile on another woman, but on her face, it was closer to a grimace. You've brought a heavy thing here, Mr. Henderson. Something hungry, she rasped. I hope your stomach is strong. Lawrence felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. What in God's name are you talking about? That land. It never gives without taking. The families before you, look for their graves if you can find them. Some say it's the soil itself that calls for it. But I think it's older than the ground. Older than all of us. Then she turned abruptly and disappeared inside, leaving Lawrence standing alone as the wind picked up, whispering around him, next. 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 That night he couldn't sleep. Long after Margaret and Thomas drifted off, he lay staring at the ceiling, the sounds of the desert creeping through the thin walls. Somewhere out there, a coyote howled, but beneath it was something else, a faint chorus like children chanting from a distance. Sometime after midnight he heard footsteps on the porch. Light. Quick. Like children running in playful circles. His heart seized in his chest. Slowly he pushed aside the thin blanket, got up and moved to the window. He pulled back the curtain and felt the breath leave his body. In the moonlight below, tiny footprints dotted the dust. Dozens of them. Too small to be Thomas's, too large to be Abigail's. They wound in circles and strange spirals, eventually trailing off toward the side of the house, toward Abigail's window. He spun around, eyes darting to her bed. Empty. Margaret, he hissed, but she lay so deeply asleep that for a heartbeat he thought she might be dead. Then he heard it, outside. Abigail's giggle, low and almost satisfied, followed by a hush of many voices whispering together. Words he couldn't understand, layered atop each other in a way that made his stomach twist. Lawrence stumbled to the door, flung it open and ran barefoot into the yard. The ground scorched his feet, but he didn't care. He scanned frantically, his eyes adjusting to the pale glow. No one there. Only the prints remained, looping over themselves in impossible patterns, crisscrossing like a lunatic scrawl. He lifted his eyes to the sky for comfort, but there were no comforting stars. Instead, he saw countless tiny red glows, like embers hovering just above the horizon, pulsing faintly. They weren't scattered like stars. They were clustered. Watching. And in that moment he felt with a sick certainty that those lights knew exactly who he was. That they were waiting for him to keep some unspoken promise. One he had made by signing his name on that cursed paper in Carson City. Behind him the front door creaked. Abigail stood there, her nightdress stained with smears of red dirt, her eyes wide and gleaming in the dark. They told me you'd come looking, she whispered. They said we'll be family now. All of us. Together in the ground. Lawrence staggered backward, unable to breathe. Abigail only smiled, a small knowing smile, and reached out a hand caked with that same rust-colored soil. Inside the house, Margaret still slept as if drugged. Somewhere deep under the earth Lawrence thought he heard something shift. Like a great mouth opening. Waiting. Chapter 2, The Ground Opens Its Mouth. Construction on the house began the next week. Lawrence hired 6 local men who were desperate enough for wages to ignore the shivers that crawled up their spines every time they set foot on the Henderson tract. They drove posts into the earth that seemed to drink greedily at each strike, swallowing the poles with a soft sigh. By the second day, 2 of the men failed to show up. By the third, another claimed he had fever and could not leave his bed. That left Lawrence, Thomas, and 3 uneasy laborers to raise the walls. "Folks around here get skittish," Silas Mott drawled when Lawrence complained. But even Silas wouldn't cross onto the property line, choosing instead to stand by his horse on the road, hat twisting in his thin hands. His eyes never quite met Lawrence's. "Superstitions," Lawrence spat, though he couldn't deny he woke each morning with a sour taste in his mouth, as though he'd been chewing old pennies all night. Inside the skeletal frame of what would be their home, Margaret tried to busy herself with unpacking. But she never let Abigail stray far from her sight. The girl had developed a habit of slipping out at dawn, returning with her nightdress stained at the hem with red dirt. Her eyes sparkled with a glassy brightness that made Margaret's stomach knot. "Where do you go?" Margaret demanded one morning, gripping Abigail's shoulders too tightly. "They show me things," Abigail said with a dreamy lilt. "Beautiful things. They're under the ground. Waiting." Margaret shook her so hard that Abigail's teeth clicked together. "Stop it. Stop talking about them." Abigail only smiled. "It doesn't matter if you believe Mama. They're hungry either way." That evening, Lawrence found Thomas behind the barn frame, vomiting into the dirt. When he knelt to help him, Thomas recoiled, shaking his head violently. "They were whispering all day, Pa. In the walls. In the boards. I thought it was just the wind, but then I saw." "Saw what?" Lawrence demanded. Thomas's eyes darted wildly. "Hands. Tiny hands. Grabbing at the foundation stones. Scratching at them from underneath." Lawrence felt a cold sweat break over his skin. "You're tired? Overworked? Tomorrow we'll finish the roof. After that we'll rest." But that night Thomas wouldn't come inside the house. He sat on the steps with a lantern burning low, shotgun across his lap, eyes fixed on the dark field. Lawrence lay awake, listening to his son muttering prayers that dissolved into sobs. Then close to midnight something tapped at the window. Not once but again and again, a slow, deliberate rhythm. Lawrence rose and parted the curtain. Abigail stood outside, staring in at him with a blank expression. Her eyes were ringed with bruised shadows. Her hands were pressed flat to the glass, and her mouth moved soundlessly. He rushed to the door, flung it open, but the yard was empty. Only the faint prints of bare feet led off into the field. He followed them by lantern light, calling her name again and again. 50 yards out, the ground was disturbed, mounded slightly as if something large had burrowed just beneath the surface. The footprints ended there. Lawrence fell to his knees, clawing at the dirt. It came up strangely warm, slick like wet clay. He dug deeper until his fingers closed on something small and cold. A doll. Abigail's doll. Its porcelain face was cracked, eyes wide with painted terror. As he held it up, something dripped from its cloth body, dark and sticky, smelling of copper. Lawrence staggered back, heart jackhammering. Behind him, a giggle floated across the field. He spun around, lantern shaking, but found only empty darkness. He ran back to the house, slammed the door behind him, and found Margaret standing in the main room, her face bloodless. "Where's Abigail?" she rasped. She's outside, I thought." "She's in her bed, Lawrence. Sleeping. I checked just now." He stared at her, then slowly looked up the staircase. A shadow moved across the landing, small and child-shaped, disappearing into Abigail's room. Margaret began to sob. Lawrence pulled her close, even as he watched the stairs, dread crawling up his spine like icy insects. The next morning the workers did not come back at all. Lawrence and Thomas tried to finish the roof alone, the silence around them pressing in like a physical weight. Midday, Lawrence heard a sound beneath the floorboards of the nearly finished house, a faint scraping like nails raking wood. He dropped his hammer, pressed his ear to the boards. The scraping stopped. For a moment he thought he heard a voice whisper his name, so softly it was almost a breath. He jerked back. Blood was seeping up between the cracks in the boards. Tiny drops, bubbling as if the house itself was sweating it out. "Pa," Thomas called shakily from the other side of the room. "Something's wrong with the cellar." They went outside to look. The trapdoor they'd set into the ground stood ajar. A rank smell wafted up, rot and rust and something else, something sour. Lawrence lifted the door fully, peered into the darkness. The walls below were streaked with dark stains that hadn't been there yesterday. At the bottom lay a pile of earth that seemed to shift, though there was no wind. As he watched, a thin hand, small, childlike, gray as ash, emerged from the soil, clawing weakly at the air. Lawrence slammed the door shut so hard it rattled the boards. When he turned, Thomas was already running for the house, pale as milk. Inside, Abigail stood in the doorway, her dress neatly clean now. Her smile was too wide. "They're almost ready," she whispered. "All they need is a few more." "Just a few." Lawrence's mouth went dry. "A few more what?" Abigail tilted her head, eyes sparkling with that unnatural brightness. "Bodies, Daddy. The land's so hungry." That night, Lawrence barred every door and window. He poured what little kerosene they had along the thresholds and lit lamps in every corner, hoping the light would drive back whatever watched them from the darkness. Thomas refused to sleep. He sat by the door with the shotgun again, eyes hollow. Every so often he would flinch and glance at the walls, as though expecting them to crack open and spill something out. Margaret lay in bed with Abigail curled against her, whispering lullabies that grew increasingly desperate, her voice cracking under the weight of her own terror. Abigail only stared up at the ceiling, humming a tuneless melody, her fingers tracing idle circles on Margaret's arm. At some point, Lawrence drifted into a restless half-sleep. He dreamt of the cellar, of being pulled down the ladder by dozens of small gray hands. Their nails bit into his flesh, and as he struggled, he realized there were no faces. Just yawning black holes where eyes and mouths should have been. He woke with a gasp to find the lamps all extinguished. The house was drowned in darkness so complete it felt thick, smothering. Somewhere nearby he heard whispering. Close. Inside the room. "Who's there?" he croaked. No answer, only the low chorus like children repeating a secret among themselves. Lawrence fumbled for matches, striking one with trembling hands. The tiny flare revealed Margaret sitting up in bed, her face wet with tears, clutching Abigail so tightly the girl's bones might snap. "They were here, Lawrence," Margaret sobbed. "They came up out of the floor. Watching us." Lawrence stared around the room, heart racing. Faint scratches marred the wooden planks, fresh, jagged grooves that hadn't been there before. Tiny as if left by small desperate fingers. A soft giggle drifted from the corner. He spun, holding the match high. Abigail was smiling again, her eyes reflecting the flame in two perfect pinpoints of red. "They like it when you're afraid," she murmured. "It makes the feast sweeter." The match burned down, searing his fingers, and he dropped it with a hiss. Darkness swallowed them again. Lawrence grabbed Margaret and Abigail, pulling them close, whispering prayers he could barely remember. All the while he felt the house tremble, a subtle vibration like something immense shifting just beneath him, waiting to break through. Come dawn, he found Thomas outside, asleep upright against the porch post, the shotgun limp in his hands. His eyes snapped open at Lawrence's touch, wild and bloodshot. "They were calling me last night," Thomas rasped. "Little voices, begging me to come see. I almost did, Pa, God help me, I almost went out into that field." Lawrence squeezed his shoulder. "We'll be finished here soon. Then we'll leave. Maybe we'll sell this place back to the company, let them worry about curses and graves." But as they spoke, Abigail stepped out onto the porch, bare feet dusted in red. She turned her gaze toward the land that stretched endlessly before them and smiled so brightly it made Lawrence's stomach lurch. "We can't leave," she said. "Not now. They've been promised." Lawrence's throat tightened. "Who promised them, Abby?" Her eyes glinted, and for the briefest instant her face seemed wrong, too long, her mouth too wide, stretching into something that was almost hungry. "You did, Daddy. When you signed your name. Didn't you read the last line?" Lawrence's pulse roared in his ears. He hadn't. He'd been so eager to seal the deal, to stake his claim. The final clause had been an afterthought, lines in archaic legal script he barely glanced over. Abigail skipped off the porch, humming her strange song, leaving tiny red footprints behind her. Thomas made a strangled sound and slumped to his knees, clutching his head. Lawrence stood frozen, feeling the truth crash down on him like a tombstone. The land hadn't simply been sold to him. He and his family had been sold to it. Payment to feed something old, patient, and endlessly starving. Chapter 3. The First Offerings. The next days passed in a blur of heat and dread. Lawrence tried to keep the work going, forcing Thomas and himself to finish the roof and begin sealing the windows. But every hammer strike seemed to echo too long, as if the land was listening, savoring the vibrations. At night they kept every lamp lit, but the flames burned oddly, wavering in still air, throwing shadows that danced on the walls in unnatural ways. Sometimes Lawrence swore he saw shapes in them, small bodies crawling on hands and knees, mouths open in silent wails. On the fourth night Thomas was gone. Lawrence woke to find his son's bed empty, the covers thrown aside. Panic surged through him as he searched the house, then staggered outside, calling Thomas's name into the heavy darkness. Halfway across the field, he found tracks, boot prints leading into a shallow wash near the property's edge. The prints became erratic, twisting back on themselves as if Thomas had spun in panicked circles. Then they stopped, simply ended in the dust. Lawrence dropped to his knees, clawing at the ground. The earth was strangely warm, almost pulsing beneath his palms, as if something massive stirred just below. "Thomas," he screamed, voice cracking. Only the wind answered, whispering in cruel, mocking tones. He stumbled back toward the house at dawn, hollow and shaking. Margaret met him on the porch, her face gaunt. "You didn't find him, did you?" she whispered. Lawrence could only shake his head. Abigail appeared in the doorway, her hair tangled, eyes bright. She clutched a small bundle wrapped in stained cloth. With a child's casual cruelty, she unwrapped it to reveal a bird, throat neatly slit, feathers matted with blood. "They said the land needs little gifts first," she said, smiling sweetly. "So it'll be gentle when it takes the big ones." Margaret let out a strangled sob, recoiling from her own daughter. Lawrence grabbed Abigail by the shoulders. "Who told you that? Who are you talking to?" Abigail tilted her head, frowning in a way that twisted her small features into something foreign. "They're under us, Daddy. Always hungry. They told me you promised. And if we don't feed them, they'll come up here and take us piece by piece." Lawrence released her as if burned. Abigail skipped off into the yard, humming that eerie, tuneless song. Margaret clutched his arm. "Lawrence, we have to leave. Tonight. I don't care about money, I don't care about land. We have to take Abigail and run." He wanted nothing more. But as he looked around, at the half-finished house, at the endless red fields stretching in every direction, a terrible certainty gripped him. They wouldn't get far. He could feel the land's attention on them, sharp and hooked, ready to drag them back no matter how far they fled. That evening, a desperate plan formed in Lawrence's mind. If it was blood the ground wanted, perhaps he could satisfy it with something less. He slaughtered 2 goats they'd brought from San Bernardino, carrying the still warm bodies into the field, laying them out like offerings. As he backed away, he felt the dirt shift underfoot, a slow heaving like the land exhaled in contentment. He returned to the house, hands slick with gore, only to find Abigail waiting by the door. "That's not enough," she whispered. "Not for what you signed. It wants us, Daddy. It wants our story in its belly. It wants to taste our names." That night, Lawrence barely slept. He lay beside Margaret, listening to Abigail's faint giggles from across the room. Sometime past midnight, a sharp crack echoed through the house. The floor seemed to quake, boards shifting beneath them. Then the smell hit, rot and rust so strong Lawrence gagged. A wet sound followed, like mud stirring. He sat up, heart hammering, and saw shapes moving in the gloom near the far wall. Small hands pushed up through the floorboards, gray and thin, nails blackened. They clawed at the air, then dragged themselves higher. Tiny eyeless heads emerged, mouths yawning open in silent cries. The hands reached for Lawrence's feet. He jerked back, pulling Margaret with him. Abigail only laughed, clapping her hands in delight. They're so happy you're still here. Soon they'll take us all under. And then we'll never be lonely again. Lawrence grabbed Abigail, shaking her. Stop it. This isn't a game. But her grin only widened, teeth too sharp in the lamplight. It was never a game, Daddy. It's a feast. And we're the sweet part. At dawn, the house stood silent again. The holes in the floor were gone, the boards seamless. As if nothing had ever broken through. But Lawrence knew better. He could still smell it faintly, the earthy stink of open graves. Margaret sat by the hearth, rocking herself. Abigail slept curled at her feet, looking peaceful for the first time in days. Lawrence stepped outside, blinking against the rising sun. The land stretched red and raw around him, waiting. Somewhere in that vast silence, he thought he heard Thomas's voice, calling faintly for help. Or perhaps it was only the wind playing cruel tricks. Either way, he knew it wasn't over. The land had taken one of them already. And it was still so very hungry. That evening, as the sun bled out behind the distant hills, Lawrence tried once more to salvage his sanity. He sat on the porch with a rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. Every whisper of wind made him flinch. Shadows seemed to writhe in the dying light, stretching long fingers toward the house. Inside, Margaret refused to leave the hearth. She clutched a rosary so tightly her knuckles blanched, lips moving in a frantic prayer that never seemed to reach her eyes. Abigail sat beside her, legs crossed, humming that same tuneless melody, head bobbing slightly. Occasionally she'd giggle at some private joke only she and the ground seemed to understand. When night finally swallowed the land, Lawrence's heart sank. He had hoped the dark would bring silence, that the horrors might rest. Instead, the house seemed to come alive. From beneath the floorboards rose a steady, wet-sucking sound, like earth drinking deep. The walls shivered, faint lines cracking along the plaster. From somewhere deep below, a dull, resonant thud began, slow and rhythmic, as if a giant heart was beating under their feet. Margaret whimpered and pressed the rosary to her lips. Abigail only smiled wider, eyes half-lidded in bliss. "They're almost here," she whispered. "They're so close, Daddy. I can feel their fingers already." Lawrence surged forward, grabbing her by the shoulders. "Enough. I won't let them have us. I won't." Abigail tilted her head, her smile twisting into something sharp, her teeth strangely long in the lamplight. "You already did. When you signed your name." A sudden crack split the air. A board near the hearth buckled, splinters shooting up like tiny knives. A gray hand burst through, grasping at nothing, its nails leaving black gouges as it scrabbled for purchase. Then another hand joined it, and another, until half a dozen clawed at the room. Margaret screamed, collapsing backward. Lawrence fired the rifle. The shot deafened him in the small space, the recoil tearing at his shoulder. Wood splintered, dust billowed, but when it cleared, the hands remained, now joined by small eyeless heads pushing through, mouths opening in silent howls. Abigail clapped, laughing. "Don't you see? They love us so much, Daddy. They want us forever." Lawrence grabbed Margaret, dragging her toward the door. Abigail skipped after them as if heading to a picnic. Outside, the cool night air felt like knives against Lawrence's sweat-soaked skin. They staggered into the yard, breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, the house groaned, a deep, guttural sound as if something enormous shifted inside. Light poured from the windows, strangely red, flickering like fire though nothing burned. Then all at once, silence. Utter, suffocating silence. Lawrence turned, clutching Margaret to his side. Abigail stood a few feet away, barefoot in the dust. She tilted her head, listening to something only she could hear. Then she smiled, serene and monstrous. "They say thank you, Daddy. They say they'll be patient for a little while longer. Because soon the real feast begins." Lawrence felt his knees give way. He crumpled to the ground, Margaret's sobs echoing in his ear. Above them, the stars blinked cold and indifferent. But near the horizon, tiny red lights pulsed, clustered together like watching eyes. And in that moment, he understood with horrifying clarity, there would be no leaving. The land had marked them. It had tasted them. And it would call them back again and again, until every last drop of their lineage soaked into the thirsty dirt. Chapter 4: The Harvest of the Hungry Earth. Days blurred into one another under a sun that seemed to hang forever at its cruel zenith. The air grew thicker, the soil around the house cracked and breathed in shallow heaves. At night, the ground pulsed softly, like a slumbering beast exhaling sour breaths that seeped up through the floorboards. Lawrence hardly slept. He sat at the kitchen table with the rifle across his lap, eyes red, breath shallow. Margaret wandered the house clutching her rosary, whispering nonsense fragments of prayers. Sometimes Lawrence caught her staring at the cellar door for long minutes, as though listening to something calling from below. Abigail, meanwhile, seemed utterly at peace. She danced barefoot across the dusty floors, singing to shadows that gathered eagerly in the corners. Sometimes she pressed her ear to the ground, nodding as if in conversation. One night, just past midnight, Lawrence awoke to a chorus of voices, children's voices, dozens of them, chanting from somewhere under the house. He stumbled to his feet, heart pounding. The chanting grew louder, bubbling up through the boards like foul steam. When he turned, Abigail stood behind him, eyes wide and glittering. "It's time, Daddy," she whispered. "They're ready." A loud crack sounded from the cellar. The trapdoor shuddered, then slowly began to rise. Cold, foul air spilled out, carrying the scent of rot and wet earth. A shape moved in the darkness below. Many shapes, pale and twitching. Margaret screamed, clutching at Lawrence. But Abigail only giggled, skipping toward the opening. "Abigail, no!" Lawrence shouted, grabbing for her. But her skin felt slick, almost oily, and she slipped from his grasp with unnatural ease. She descended the cellar steps without hesitation, her little feet vanishing into the dark. Lawrence lunged after her, hauling Margaret with him. What they saw below would haunt the last flickers of their sanity. The cellar had grown impossibly vast, stretching far beyond its humble brick walls. The dirt floor writhed, alive with dozens, no hundreds, of small eyeless children. Their skin was gray, mottled with sores, tiny hands reaching, mouths gaping in eternal, silent hunger. In the center stood Abigail, arms spread wide, smiling serenely. The children pressed close to her, their hands stroking her dress, her legs as if adoring some terrible saint. "They promised if I stayed they'd let you two go," she said calmly, voice echoing strangely in the cavernous space. "Isn't that fair, Daddy? Isn't that love?" Lawrence felt Margaret collapse beside him, sobbing. Rage and terror warred in his chest. He raised the rifle, aiming at the throng. The ground erupted beneath him. Hands shot up, clawing his ankles, dragging him down. The rifle clattered from his grip. He struggled, kicking, but more hands joined, dozens, then hundreds, cold and damp, pulling him inch by inch toward the writhing mass. Margaret screamed, trying to tear him free. But as she pulled, tiny arms wrapped around her waist, her legs. She fell backward, vanishing into a tide of small gray bodies that swallowed her whole. Her screams faded, replaced by wet tearing sounds. Lawrence clawed at the dirt, nails breaking, lungs burning. His head was pulled down last. As his eyes met Abigail's one final time, he saw her lips move. "Thank you for keeping your promise, Daddy." Then the children surged over him. Tiny mouths bit into his flesh, teeth sinking deep, drawing out the warm life that seeped eagerly into the soil. His scream was muffled under their cold, weightless bodies. Above, the house shuddered. The walls cracked wide, beams splintered. The roof caved in, sending dust billowing into the night. From miles away, it might have looked like nothing more than an old structure finally giving way to time. When the dust settled, only a smooth patch of dark earth remained. No sign of wood or brick or blood. Just rich, freshly turned soil, glistening as if after rain. In the distance, coyotes howled. The land was silent once more, sated for now. Lawrence's last thoughts before the darkness swallowed him were not of salvation or forgiveness. They were muddled flashes, Abigail laughing in the sun, Margaret's tired smile by the hearth, the sharp scent of ink as he signed that cursed paper. Then all memory was torn away under a flood of cold, gnawing mouths. When he awoke, if one could call it that, it was with no breath in his chest. He was lying on the packed earth, staring up at a ceiling of roots that pulsed with sluggish red sap. Around him dozens of small shapes moved. The children. Or what remained of them. They crawled across his body, their tiny hands probing old wounds that no longer bled. Their mouths pressed to his skin, but he felt no pain. Only a deep, hollow emptiness, as if something vital had been hollowed out and carried off. Nearby, Margaret knelt in the dirt, her eyes blank and unseeing. Her lips moved constantly, repeating a prayer that had long since lost meaning. Tiny figures nestled in her lap, nuzzling her as if she were their mother. And Abigail, dear Abigail, stood among them, taller now, her limbs too long, her eyes pits of liquid black. Her dress was stained dark from throat to hem. When she smiled, her teeth were jagged, grown to sharp points. "They love me here," she whispered. "They promised I'd never be alone. They promised we'd all be together forever." Lawrence tried to speak, but no words came. His tongue was thick, his throat full of dirt. Abigail stepped close, tilting her head, regarding him with something like pity. She knelt and pressed her forehead to his, and for an instant, he felt the rush of countless voices inside his skull. All the lost children, all the broken families, echoing in a chorus of hunger that would never be sated. When she pulled back, her smile was soft, almost tender. "Sleep now, Daddy. The land will hold us safe. It always keeps what it's given." Lawrence's vision darkened at the edges, swallowed by a creeping black that tasted of earth and blood. The last thing he saw was Abigail turning away, taking the hands of two eyeless children, leading them deeper into the twisting tunnels under the house that no longer stood. Above ground, dawn broke over a field that looked perfectly ordinary, save for a faint pattern of small footprints crisscrossing the soil. Birds returned to their songs. The wind blew gently, stirring the grass that had already begun to grow thick and unnaturally green. Far off, on the dusty road that led to Carson City, a lone figure on horseback paused. A land agent with fresh contracts in his saddlebag, looking to sell cheap lots to the next hopeful dreamers chasing fortune. He squinted toward the Henderson plot, noting the lush color of the field. Fertile, he thought. Damn fertile for this part of Nevada. A slow smile crossed his face as he spurred the horse forward, already rehearsing his promises about water rights and future rail lines. In his coat pocket, the ink on new deeds dried patiently, waiting for more names, more signatures, more futures to be fed to the hungry ground. Chapter 5, Roots of the Lost. Years slipped by in the dust of Nevada. The land above the old Henderson tract changed hands more times than any official ledger cared to note. Brokers in Carson City passed the lot off like a bad penny, burying its history under new ink and brighter promises. The field grew lush, startlingly green for such an arid county. Travelers often paused along the road just to marvel at it, a splash of emerald in a world of rust and bone. Locals avoided it altogether. Ranch hands spit over their shoulders when they drove cattle past the old boundary posts. They said animals refused to graze there. Horses balked and shivered, whites of their eyes showing as they pulled against reins. None of this stopped the Bonner family. Elias Bonner was a broad-backed man with a booming laugh, newly come from Missouri with dreams of taming the West. He brought with him his wife, 2 young sons, and a determination thick enough to choke a mule. When the land agent offered the property at half its value, water rights included, Elias signed without blinking. "Seems like Providence, Lucy," he crowed, waving the deed. "Richest patch in all Nevada for pennies. Soon we'll be shipping grain back east by the wagon load." Lucy only smiled weakly, clutching her children close. From the moment they arrived, she felt something watching. At night, she lay awake in their small cabin, listening to the walls creak in patterns too deliberate to be blamed on settling wood. Their boys, Samuel and Henry, took to the land with reckless joy, running barefoot through waist-high grass. But by the second week, Lucy found them crouched by the old well, a stone circle nearly swallowed by weeds. They whispered down into its dark throat, then giggled as though it answered. "What are you two about?" she snapped, pulling them away. Henry only shrugged. "They're funny down there, Mama. They said they remember us." Lucy felt her skin crawl. That night, she begged Elias to consider leaving. But he laughed it off, calling her fanciful. It's just soil, woman. Dirt can't talk. The next morning Samuel was gone. They searched the house, the barn, the fields until Lucy's throat was raw from shouting. Hours later they found him at the edge of the property, standing knee-deep in the brush. His face was slack, eyes rolled back to show only white. His lips moved soundlessly. When Elias shook him, Samuel crumpled boneless to the ground. His skin was cold, breath shallow. It took hours for him to wake. When he finally did, he sobbed without words, clinging to Lucy's skirts. That night, Lucy awoke to find Samuel gone again. This time she ran barefoot into the fields, heart hammering. Near the well she found small footprints in the dew, dozens of them all circling the stones in tight, hungry loops. And above the well's mouth she thought she saw tiny hands gripping the edge, pulling something small and struggling inside. She screamed, but by the time Elias reached her, the well was empty. Only the grass swayed, whispering secrets. Samuel was never found. A week later, Henry fell ill with a wasting fever that left him thin and glassy-eyed. He took to standing by the cabin door at twilight, whispering to the darkness. When Lucy pulled him back inside, he fought her with surprising strength. "They're waiting for me, Mama," he sobbed. "Don't you hear them singing?" Lucy did. At night, the house was filled with faint, lilting voices, the same haunting melody that once dripped from Abigail Henderson's lips. Sometimes Lucy woke to find Henry's bed empty, the front door ajar, a trail of tiny footprints leading into the fields. By the first frost Henry was gone too. Elias raged, cursing God, cursing the land, cursing himself. But when he tried to hitch the wagon to leave, the horses reared, eyes wild, refusing to step onto the road. The second night after, Elias went into the fields with a lantern and a rifle. Lucy never saw him again. Left alone, she boarded up the cabin, clutching her Bible. The voices never ceased. They grew louder each night, whispering promises of reunion, of an eternal family waiting just below. When they finally broke through the floor, Lucy didn't scream. She only knelt, arms open, tears on her face, as dozens of small hands reached for her in the dark. By dawn, the cabin stood silent. The door swung gently in the breeze, tapping against the frame in a soft, patient rhythm, like tiny hands knocking, always knocking. After Lucy vanished, the property sat abandoned. Locals who dared venture close spoke of strange sights. Children glimpsed at the edge of the fields, standing hand in hand, faces blank and gray. At night, lanterns sometimes flared along the old boundaries, bobbing as if carried by invisible processions. Those who came too near claimed the air grew thick, heavy in the chest. Some turned back halfway down the road, overcome by sudden grief so profound it felt like mourning loved ones they had never known. Years later, a pair of bounty riders stopped by the abandoned cabin, seeking shelter from a dust storm. They found the door half rotted off its hinges, the inside strewn with brittle prayer books and remnants of a woman's life, a hairbrush tangled with long strands, a cracked mirror reflecting only shadows. One of the men, Wes, laughed nervously. "Hell of a place. Who'd live out here by choice?" His partner didn't answer. He stood staring at the fireplace, where dozens of tiny handprints smudged the soot, some so faint they seemed to dance if you looked too long. That night, as the wind howled, they tried to sleep on bedrolls near the hearth. But the floor creaked constantly, shifting under their weight. Wes awoke to find his partner sitting bolt upright, eyes wide and blank, mouth moving. "They're so lonely down there," the man whispered, voice rough as gravel. "They said I could keep them company." Wes reached out in panic, but the man suddenly convulsed and pitched forward. His head struck the stone hearth with a sickening crack. Blood pooled around him, soaking into the boards. Before Wes could react, the floor seemed to sigh. The blood rippled, pulled along tiny channels in the wood, draining away toward the far corner where the planks bowed slightly downward. As he watched in mute horror, the wood split, just enough for a small gray hand to reach up, palm open as if an invitation. Wes ran from the cabin, tearing through the fields. The grass clawed at his legs, tripping him again and again. Behind him, he swore he heard dozens of feet chasing, pattering through the dirt, giggling softly. He never stopped until he reached Carson City. By then he was half delirious, ranting about children in the earth, and a woman with black eyes smiling at him from beneath the roots. The local sheriff locked him up for his own safety, but by morning Wes had torn out his tongue with his own hands. They found him smiling, blood smeared across the walls in looping, childish script. No one ever deciphered the words. Meanwhile the field thrived. From a distance, it looked like paradise, a perfect, waving sea of green, humming with hidden life. Birds nested at its edges but never within. Travelers still paused to admire it, remarking how strange it was that such fertile land stood unsold generation after generation. No one dared purchase it. Not yet. But the deed still sat in a dusty office in Carson City waiting. The ink was faded now, the paper brittle. Yet the names of the Hendersons, the Bonners, and countless others were still legible, promises etched in lines that no one living could fully comprehend. And in the hush before dawn, when the desert held its breath, the field sometimes whispered. Soft voices rose from deep below, singing snatches of lullabies in broken, eager harmony. Waiting. Always waiting. For someone new to sign, to build, to plant roots that would reach deeper than they ever intended, until the land opened wide and welcomed them home. Chapter 6. The Land Remembers. In the spring of 1909's 50th anniversary, a mining consortium from Chicago purchased a vast swath of Nevada soil that included the old Henderson tract. The company men came in fine suits, armed with thick contracts and slick smiles. They scoffed at local warnings, dismissing tales of vanished families and whispering fields as desert superstition. They brought crews in by the dozens, rough men with hard hands, ready to break the ground, sink deep irrigation lines, and plow the field into perfect order. Massive steam tractors chugged across the property, iron teeth biting into the lush grass. The first day went smooth enough. By evening, neat furrows scarred the earth, ready for seed. But that night, in the camps erected near the road, the workers complained of restless sleep. Some woke screaming about children's faces in the dark, tiny hands pressing over their mouths. Foreman Riley laughed them off. Boys been hittin' the bottle too hard, that's all. But the next day 2 tractors failed to start. Their boilers were found empty, not of water but of something darker, a residue thick and red that stained the mechanic's gloves. No one could explain it. By dusk, a trench dug for irrigation collapsed, swallowing a laborer named Hartigan alive. His screams echoed from the hole long after the dirt should have muffled them. When they pulled him out hours later, his body was strangely desiccated, as though every drop of blood had been drawn out. His mouth was packed full of soil. That night the camp stood silent. Lanterns burned bright, men huddled close to the fires, whispering of going home. But the company men would have none of it. They increased pay, doubled the whiskey rations, promised bonuses. Just a few more days, Riley barked. We'll have the best yield in the state. But the land had waited long enough. The third night, screams ripped through the tents. Workers woke to find children standing among them, dozens of small gray figures with hollow eyes and mouths full of black earth. They reached for the men with delicate hands that gripped like vices. By morning half the crew was gone. The others gathered their pay and fled, leaving wagons, tools, even family keepsakes behind. The company men cursed, furious at the wasted investment. Still they wouldn't retreat. A last-ditch attempt was made. A hired crew from Reno, men with shotguns and dynamite, prepared to clear out whatever nests in the ground. They set charges all across the field. As dusk fell, they lit the fuses and retreated. The explosions rolled across the valley, shaking dust from distant cliffs. Great gouts of dirt and shattered roots burst skyward. For a moment, it seemed they'd succeeded. The ground lay torn open, steaming. Then something moved. From the largest crater, a wave of small shapes crawled forth, hundreds of them, bodies slick with black mud, eyes empty sockets. Their mouths hung open in hungry silence. They washed over the men, pulling them down without a single gunshot fired. Muffled cries cut through the dust, then faded. When the haze cleared, the field looked untouched, except for small, neat mounds dotting the soil, as if fresh graves had been arranged overnight. In the center stood Abigail, or what was left of her. She was taller now, her skin a parchment-thin veil over something dark that pulsed beneath. Her hair writhed as though underwater. Her smile was the same, wide, knowing, patient. Around her, the children gathered close, nestling against her skirts. She raised a hand, and the field seemed to breathe in unison. Tiny sprouts pushed up through the churned soil, growing impossibly fast, twining around the scattered tools and wagon wheels. Within hours, the land was lush again, hiding all signs of violence beneath a gentle green blanket. A week later, a telegram arrived in Carson City. No further cultivation possible. Recommend abandoning project. Land does not cooperate. The company quietly closed its file on the property. Profits were easier elsewhere. The deeds were shelved again, yellowing, joining the brittle papers of the Hendersons, the Bonners, countless other families whose names were now little more than echoes in the archives. Yet the land waited. It had always waited. On certain nights when the moon hung low and swollen, travelers along that lonely stretch might see children playing at the field's edge, dozens of them, hand in hand, their laughter drifting across the sagebrush. Sometimes a woman stood among them, waving with a slow, eerie grace. And sometimes, only sometimes, a passerby would feel compelled to stop. To step from the road and wander through the grass, chasing the sound of soft voices that promised warmth, belonging, family. By morning the road was empty again. And the field stood greener than ever. Decades slipped by. The world modernized around the old Nevada Valley. Rail lines lengthened, automobiles replaced stagecoaches, neon eventually lit up distant Las Vegas with its brash promise of fortune. But here, on this forgotten stretch of earth, time coiled in a slow, patient spiral. The land lay deceptively tranquil. Generations came and went, the property records moldered, and stories drifted into local folklore. Children dared each other to run up to the edge of the lush field and shout insults into the wind. Sometimes they claimed to hear faint giggles answering back, or saw small figures dancing just beyond reach. Old ranch hands still spat when they drove cattle by. One grizzled drover, missing 2 fingers and most of his teeth, told a younger hand, "It ain't the ground that's cursed, boy, it's the mouths under it. They never close." Meanwhile, county clerks occasionally found the property records on their desks, shuffled back into circulation by bureaucratic accident. Each time, some ambitious developer would begin inquiries, lured by the promise of water rights and fertile soil. Yet every deal somehow fell through. Investors pulled out abruptly, crews quit before papers were signed, surveys returned with strange, conflicting measurements. It was as though the land itself pushed them away, until someone just as hungry came along. One summer, a small oil outfit from Utah considered testing the tract. They sent 2 men to scout it, men in stiff collars and shiny boots who laughed at superstitions. They spent a night camping on the old boundary with ledgers and survey tools spread on a crate between them. By morning their tent stood empty. Footprints, many small footprints, crisscrossed the ground around it, disappearing into the waving green. The company quietly withdrew interest. As the decades wore on, local families spoke less openly of the Henderson place. Still, some whispered of seeing a woman there at twilight, tall and thin, her hair tangled with grass and roots. Children clustered around her legs, some holding hands, others twirling in slow circles. Their faces were always blurred by the gloom, but it was said their eyes shone wet and black, hungry even in mirth. Travelers sometimes glimpsed lanterns bobbing along the old wagon ruts at night, weaving deeper into the field. Few were brave, or foolish, enough to follow. Those who did return changed. Pale, hollow-eyed, whispering of voices beneath the ground that had promised them belonging, family, eternity. None of them stayed long in town after that. Once, a drifter scrawled a single line on the side of the Carson City depot before disappearing for good. It read in crooked, childish script, "They're always hungry. They never stop singing." No one bothered to paint it over. Epilogue, whispers carried on the wind. Fragment from the Carson City Courier, July 2, 1959. New investment group eyes long dormant Henderson tract near Old Las Vegas line. Representatives from the Graham Consolidated Company out of Denver arrived last week to survey the famously rich but curiously unclaimed parcel east of Las Vegas, once known as the Henderson Tract. Local officials expressed optimism that fresh capital could finally turn the land productive, citing its impressive soil reports and untapped aquifer potential. Residents in nearby settlements were less enthusiastic. Longtime rancher Bill Hatch simply shook his head when asked for comment. "You can't plant nothing there that don't already own the place," he said. Company surveyors declined to discuss preliminary findings, but hinted at some unusual subsurface structures. Plans for test drilling are to be finalized by late autumn. Letter never mailed, found in the effects of Foreman Charlie Muir, dated September 4, 1959. Dear Maybelle. I tried writing you sooner, but by God, Maybelle, it's hard to think straight out here. Hard to breathe too, if I'm honest. The air carries a tang I can't place, something sweet and rotted at once. The men keep asking to be reassigned. They complain of hearing singing under the ground. Singing, Maybelle. Like choirs of children. I told them it's just wind through the gullies. But last night I heard it too. I was sober, swear it. Found something else this morning. Dozens of small handprints pressed in the dust all around my tent. Too small for grown men. Some still fresh enough I thought they'd move if I blinked. I'm getting off this job soon as I collect my pay. Tell the kids I love them. Charlie. Bar gossip, transcribed by local law clerk observing interviews in a Las Vegas tavern, November 1960. Old man Hatch says he once saw that field breathe. Like a lung filling up. Said the grass laid flat all one way then rippled back. Nearly had a stroke on his horse right there. Couple from Reno tried building out there years ago. Wife walked off into the green at dusk and never came back. Husband hanged himself from a tree 2 days later. Sheriff called it dust madness, but folks around here knew better. My cousin swears he seen lanterns moving through their last harvest moon. Says he heard kids laughing, but not happy laughing. Hungry laughing. If you know what I mean. Excerpt from an unpublished monograph by Dr. Harlan T. Beasley, folklorist, UNR, 1963. The Henderson Tract stands as one of the most persistent supernatural loci in the American West. Unlike more flamboyant hauntings, ghost towns, mining tragedies, this parcel carries its legend quietly, like a hum at the edge of hearing. The recurring imagery is strikingly consistent across decades and informants. Small gray children, silent open mouths, hands that clutch and pull. Even newcomers unacquainted with local lore report eerily similar dreams after spending nights near the property. Of particular note is the recurring figure of the woman among them, described as tall, thin, hair matted with earth and roots. She is said to stand in the fields at twilight, watching the road, surrounded by children who press close against her skirts. In nearly every account, her smile is described as both loving and carnivorous. Testimony recorded by Father D. Alejo, Parish Mission Log, December 1972. A young man named Raul came to confession after driving through the area on his way to Tucson. He was inconsolable, weeping that he had heard voices under the ground. Said they promised him peace, a family that would never leave him again. He said he parked his car by the side of the road and stepped into the grass, that it felt warm like breath under his feet. Then small hands took his and he was led deeper in. "They let me go this time, Father," he whispered, voice cracking. "But next time I won't want to come back." Last entry in a geologist's field journal, 1981. Core samples show odd pockets of organic matter, human, far below expected strata. Should not be possible given local sediment ages. Found fine scratches on drill casing when we pulled it up, almost like fingernails. Hearing things at night. Children singing lullabies. Will recommend halting project. Not worth chasing ghosts in dirt. Modern local folklore, collected by a documentary crew in 1997. A teenager named Celia stood before the camera, fidgeting with her bracelet. Her eyes darted nervously toward the horizon. "My grandma used to say never take shortcuts through that field even in daylight," said the ground's greedy. "Once it knows your scent, it'll follow you in your dreams." I didn't believe her. Last year me and my cousin cut across it on a dare. Halfway through we heard laughing. Little voices right up close, but when we turned around no one was there. At night I still see them. Kids standing by my bed. Their mouths are so dark. I don't think they want to hurt me, I think they want me to come back with them. Someday I probably will. Undated county record note, stamped with a fresh property seal, found in a Carson City file cabinet, 2025. Parcel hashtag NV4471 Henderson tract. Preliminary evaluation suggests excellent potential for boutique vineyard development. Rich soil composition, stable aquifer reports. Recommend fast-track processing to attract high-value out-of-state investment. Request marketing prepare brochure with emphasis on lush historic farmland with unparalleled fertility. Note: local folklore concerns to be omitted from promotional materials. The land waits, and so it continues. New ink, new signatures, new families who chase the illusion of fortune across Nevada's hard skin, all unwittingly drawn to a patch of earth that has fed itself for over a century. If you stand at the edge of that field at dusk, you might see them. Children dancing hand in hand, small feet stirring up dust. You might hear faint lullabies rising from the soil, soft as breath against your ear. If you wait long enough, you'll see her too, the woman with hollow eyes and a smile that promises comfort deeper than bone. And maybe, just maybe, you'll feel a tug at your hand. A gentle, insistent pull, as if inviting you to step forward, to join the circle and sink down into the warm, welcoming dark. Because the land never forgets. The land never stops hungering. And once it knows your name, it will whisper it forever, through roots and stone and the cold sleep of the earth, until you come home. In 2019, the old Henderson tract was nothing more than a half-forgotten entry in dusty county records, an eerie patch of Nevada earth that locals still whispered about but rarely named outright. By then, the legends were old, so old that even the fear had become diluted, drifting through generations as half-jokes told over bar counters. A place that was cursed, sure, but also absurd in its mystery, too outlandish to be truly real. Mark Yates didn't believe in curses. He was a travel vlogger who thrived on myths, chasing haunted highways and derelict hotels, laughing off creeks in the dark for hundreds of thousands of viewers. His channel was a mix of charm and spectacle, of poking fun at America's ghost stories while secretly hoping to catch anything that might prove them true. When he first teased an episode about the Henderson land, his comment section exploded. Hundreds warned him off with that particular urgency that blends superstition and genuine dread. They wrote that the land was different. That it didn't just scare people, it kept them. That no amount of jokes or bravado would matter once the soil knew your scent. Mark laughed it off in his next video. Sitting behind the wheel of his rental car with sun pouring over the cracked desert road, he grinned at the camera and promised he'd come back with epic ghost kid footage. Then he turned the key and drove straight into the heart of the legend. He arrived at midday. The air was hotter there, strangely heavy even for Nevada. Beyond a sagging line of old fence posts lay the infamous field, an improbable sea of deep green in a wasteland of dust and brittle rock. It was beautiful in a way that made the skin crawl, as if the land itself had secrets too lush, too vibrant, too alive. Mark filmed himself stepping over the boundary, joking that if he vanished, someone should feed his cat. At first, everything was exactly as expected. The grass was tall and thick, brushing his legs, stirring in a breeze that seemed to come from nowhere. He wandered, describing the landscape, mocking the old tales. Then he paused, his face shifting. He said the ground felt soft underfoot. Springy. Like walking over damp moss instead of desert. He crouched down, pressing his hand into the soil, and when he lifted it again, it was smeared with dark, wet earth. He brought it close to his nose, then laughed awkwardly, glancing around. That's when he heard it. Or at least, that's when he admitted on camera that he heard something. His words grew halting. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the waving grass. He said it sounded like children laughing. Faint, just beyond sight. A few minutes later, he started back toward the road, trying to keep up the banter, but the edge was gone from his grin. He kept glancing behind him. At one point he stopped entirely, whispering that he felt hands on his back pushing him forward. Invisible, weightless, but undeniably there. He reached his car looking pale and shaky. The last clip he ever posted showed him sitting behind the wheel, breathless. He tried to smile, told his viewers that he'd edit the footage tonight, that maybe he'd caught something eerie to finally prove the legends true. Then he laughed weakly and said that if he didn't upload by morning, someone should come looking. No one did. Mark was never seen again. 2 days later, Highway Patrol found his car exactly where he left it. The doors were unlocked, the camera was on the seat beside his phone and wallet, everything of value untouched. But the inside of the driver's window was covered in tiny handprints. Perfect, delicate impressions pressed into the glass in a dark, rusty stain that no one wanted to test. His channel remains online to this day. Hundreds of thousands still subscribe, comments pouring in daily under that final video. Some claim to see shapes moving in the grass behind him. Some swear they hear faint voices whispering his name just before the video cuts. A few say the clip sometimes glitches for just a heartbeat, and shows Mark not standing alone but surrounded by children, gray and small, their empty mouths open in joyous silence. Locals say it's fitting. They say the land always finds new ways to lure people close. Through ink on old contracts, through whispers of cheap acreage, through the vanity of internet fame. It doesn't matter how times change, the ground is patient. It remembers every name, every signature, every footstep that dares press into its hungry skin. And so the stories continue. A field that should have shriveled long ago still thrives, impossibly green, fed by more than rain. Travelers sometimes stop along the road at dusk, drawn by the beauty, by the breeze that smells faintly of damp earth and something coppery. Some get back in their cars, unsettled without knowing why. Others step beyond the fence, smiling at the softness underfoot, thinking for a moment how warm it feels, almost like breath. The land waits. It always waits. And it always hungers,